Good evening, Abyssinian. Good evening, everyone. Everyone that's tuning in to us from around the world on the World Wide Web. Good evening, good evening, good evening. This is ABC Squared, Abyssinian's book club. Abyssinian Baptist Church, we have a book club going on. We started out a couple of weeks ago, and we're in our third. This is our third installment, and myself, Reverend Darrell Bryant, and Brother Chris Randall. We will be facilitating this book club, uh, all the interaction that is going on with it, and we look to have a very good, informative time as we've had over the last couple of weeks, and we just anticipate good engagement, good information, and hopefully something that will inspire you to um, read some of the material that we will be discussing, and uh, getting some more insight on what we're trying to do to continue to get out the message of liberation, Black liberation. Um, First, let us start with a word of prayer. God, we thank you now. We thank you for this day. Thank you for all that you bestowed upon us to do. God, we thank you for giving us this vision that aligns with our mission as Abyssinian Baptist Church. God, we thank you for all the participation that we have had, that we anticipate. God, we just thank you for everything. God, be with us now. Be uh, steadfast in all that you do as we encounter our third installment of our book club discussion. Uh, Let us have good, candid, and courageous conversations, um, and just engage. God, we just thank you for all of it. In the name of the Black Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, we say Ashe and Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Also, one of the things that I forgot to mention last week was that this is the kickoff for the quarter for Team Inspiration, which Reverend Frank Johnson and myself, we are trying to spearhead that. And this is definitely something to help get that thing, get Team Inspiration off the ground with the book club. Um Hopefully, we can have more discussion about Team Inspiration and uh, inspiration as it pertains to our vision as Abyssinians. Brother Chris Randall, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm good, sir. How about yourself?
I'm
I
good,
cannot
man. I'm
complain.
good. Good. Dealing with this heat again down here in Memphis. So
Listen, it's listen. Like as one of my favorite poets, Sonny Patterson, say, "Hell is hot, no matter where you be." So,
wherever you are.
right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Chris,
I really needed this tonight because I feel like I have started to learn that you're doing the right thing when you start when all hell break loose around you. That's how you know. So I got a funeral to go to later this week. I also have on the anniversary of my great ancestor mother who is on the Abyssinian ancestor altar. Her birthday is July the 11th, so it's a lot going on. But I'm glad.
right.
I'm glad to be here. Glad to be here. So
Okay.
let's get started because tonight we have some interesting things to talk about. So everybody, as you all know, we have been deeply entrenched in a speech given by the great ancestor and scholar Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois titled Whither Now and Why. And tonight we are going to place our feet squarely on page 195 of the book, The Education of Black People, Where the Speech, Whether Now and Why is published. And on page 195, he has opened up our conversation, a conversation about what it means for us, that education, what education means or should mean to us in a world where in 1960 he was looking at the reality of the life after the Brown versus Board education decision and what it would mean for integration. So can we get the next slide, ladies and gentlemen, please? So if I was somebody else, I'd say primary preaching assignment, but I am not that person. Our primary reading assignment is really to answer two major questions and think about two real candid themes. What is the purpose of mainstream education in the lives of Black folk, given that we live in America? And whether now, what must we do to challenge and reframe education to work for Black liberation? Right. So those are going to be the two grounding questions that I want everybody to be focused on, as we think about this. All right. So we're going to revisit the same sort of story that we imagined earlier last week. And what we're going to think about is David is now firmly the king of Israel. And he asked, is there anybody of the house of Saul, the former king, who he had succeeded from the throne, that he could be nice to? And he finds his brother named Mephibosheth. And when this brother is brought to him, he tells the brother, you will dwell at my table. Now, I've been asking people, and Brother Darrell has been asking people to think critically about what it means to be invited to sit at the king's table. Okay? When you're seated at the king's table, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is that when you're seated at the king's table, be clear, you are subject to the whims, desires, tastes, and wants of the king. You're going to eat what the king eats and how the king eats. Okay, and I think that this is an interesting place to place our feet, considering I think that is exactly what the educational process is in America. Next slide, please. So, on page 195 of the text, Du Bois opens up with a very interesting question. First of all, he calls education a problem. He calls education the problem, the current problem of education of our children. And he says that by the law of the land today, they should be admitted to public schools. Dr. Janice Hale, a now venerated elder and ancestor, has some groundbreaking research. She is not only was a long-time professor at Wayne State University in early childhood development, but she was also the founder of the Institute of the Study of the African American Child. And she highlights some very interesting research. She argues that typically what has been done in the study of education is to compare Black children to white children. She then goes on to say that when you try to compare Black children to white children, it is essentially like comparing gold to yellow crayon. So those two things are not the same. But what it is that if you compare African children on the continent of Africa and African American children, Africans who have been placed in America due to the transatlantic slave trade, then you find amazing things. Number one, I think is most important here is Dr. Hale does something to say that education is a cultural practice as much as it is a practice of learning information. That's important, cultural practice. Meaning you in education, you learn as much about the people with power as you do the information that you are getting. You learn how people in power think. You are given the same lenses that people in power have, and you learn from the same methods that people in power have. Now, Janice Hale says that when you study white and European children, they are typically left brain object oriented. Let me explain what that means. That's a really complicated way of saying they learn from objects, books, tablets, objects. So from the time that you're a baby and you're in a crib and you got the thing going over your head with the lights and the noise, to the time that you are at the University of Memphis doing a PhD, it is about objects, silence, objects. Black folks come from an oral culture. That's why we have a thing called the Psalms, things called Proverbs in the Bible. That's how you know it's our book, okay? Our oral culture. We are right brain subject oriented. We learn from people. But the problem with the educational structure, from the time you're in a crib to the time you get in a PhD and all throughout K through 12 education, you are learning in a way that is primarily built to serve the cultural needs of white Europeans. It is also important to note that 79 to 80%, don't worry, you read my mind. You read my mind, Dr. Fisher. 79 to 80% of the teachers in America are white, which means that your children, this is the implication, particularly in a place like Memphis, where 12,000 in the 2017-2018 school year, 12,926 Black students were suspended in Shelby County. The ways your children are judged, whether your child is seen as gifted and talented, whether your child is seen as having a learning disability, whether or not your child is seen as disruptive, whether your child is seen as someone who has something to add to the educational experience, is all based on the whims and cultural ideas and practices of Europeans. These things are more, the negative outcomes that we receive as Black folks in education, this is why Dr. Du Bois calls it a problem, is more a referendum on the whiteness and the white supremacy of the education system more than it is Black folks. Okay? That's important. So be clear about that. That's why he calls it a problem, because it's a cultural practice of whiteness. So really what you're learning is how can I internalize enough white norms and procedures in order to be proficient at education. Right? Right, LaKendra, that's why the average Black child hates school. Okay? And we'll get to that next. Can I get the next slide, please, ladies and gentlemen? All right. See what I'm saying, Dr. Fisher? Great minds think alike. Dr. Jeremiah Wright wrote a powerful piece called Looking Back, Look Around, and Looking Ahead. And what he does is to say that the integration that we experienced post Brown versus Board of Education was more about cultural colonization, more about imposing the ways of knowing and ideas and structures of Europeans, far more than it was about leveling the playing field. Dr. Wright argues that when powerful entities, right, when David invites Mephibosheth, powerful entities integrate with the oppressed, it's never neutral. It's always to solidify power. It is to determine who has the cultural control in a society, right? And he said Brown versus Board of Education is no different. Powerful white policymakers, school administrators sought to force Black folks to learn under their cultural, philosophical, and political cultural frames, not the other way around. They were not integrating with us. We were being bused to integrate with them. And remember, Dr. Hale analyzes that is not a neutral thing. We are not situated and framed culturally the same way. And because 79 to 80% of teachers come from a different culture, they are not situated to understand us in the same way. So what, LaKendra, what you were saying about hating school, that is predictable based on the way it's all set up. What is the likelihood that a middle-class white person, for Teacher of America, is going to understand a Black kid from Memphis and Shelby County or Baltimore, where I'm from, or any of that? What's the likelihood? The language will not be set up. how we understand things is not going to be set up, and also how we learn is not going to be set up, right? And to Dr. Fisher's point, Dr. Jeremiah Wright talked about how there was so much anxiety by white teachers because black students wanted to be in their space because they learn from people. Mm-hmm. If you're invited to someone else's table of power, absolutely. Usually when you're invited to the table, you're usually seen as a threat. If you can't help the agenda, that's the thing. And as we get through this later on, we're going to talk about some of the pitfalls of that. Can I get the next slide, Lady Denise? Now, remember in the previous slide, so Dr. Wright talked about all of the problems that are going to come from the integration issue. That this was about cultural power. And in the text on page 195, Dr. Du Bois gives some chilling predictions. This is 1960. He says, by the law of the land today, they should be admitted to the public school. He then goes on to say, if and when they are admitted to these schools, black kids are admitted to these schools, certain things will inevitably happen. Inevitably follow, sorry. Negro teachers will become rarer and rarer and in many cases disappear. Negro children will be instructed in the public schools and taught under unpleasant, if not discouraging circumstances. Now, Dr. Leslie Fenwick, building on which, so remember now, we got education as a cultural practice. The integration process was about cultural hegemony and control. What then happened is Dr. Leslie Fenwick, longtime professor at Howard University, was a part. I believe was the dean of the School of Education there. Also was the education dean at Howard University. What she did in her book Jim Crow's Pink Slip is she talks about all of the people, these amazing schools that black folks set up after we have been set free from the plantation in theory, from a legal perspective. And one of the things that she highlights is she tells stories. So I can't, for the brevity of time, sake of time, I can't break down every story. But one of the things that she talks about in great detail is she would say something like this. Let's say that you have a chemistry degree. You have a PhD, you're a black person, and you have a PhD in chemistry from Columbia University in the North, right? You cannot be educated, you cannot be employed in most white places. So if you want a good paying job, you could be a domestic worker. At some point, maybe next week, we're gonna talk about why that's dangerous. You could be a Pullman porter on a train. Things like that. Or you could be a teacher or a preacher, right? What would happen then is that black schools would employ you. So now black students in K through 12 would be getting chemistry education from a black chemist who has a PhD in chemistry, who, unlike what the work that Dr. Hale was doing, who would know your cultural realities, know what you're up against, create a loving environment for you, cared about you, grew up facing some of the same things as you, and you'll be getting an amazing education from one of those people. Well, when Brown happens, a lot of these black teachers, these amazing black teachers, are fired in favor of mediocre white ones. Yeah, you're right, Sister Colleen. Black jobs, right? Absolutely. One story that she said that she came across, Dr. Fenwick comes across in her research, is literally this happened: is that a black teacher with a PhD was fired in favor of a white milkman. You read this book, please do. It's a painful situation. But basically, these amazing black educators were liquidated. And even now, today, we're still seeing the fallout of that, where 79 to 80% of teachers are white. And many of the amazing figures we talk about in history, the ones we're allowed to learn, because in places like Memphis, I'm repping it today, history is being controlled by them. Your Rosa Parkses, your Martin Luther King Juniors, your Benjamin Elijah Mazes, your your all of these different amazing figures in history that we highlight are all thinking about and taught by Black teachers in segregated environments. I got you, Dr. Fisher. I'm right on your street. Yeah, this all correlates to how white churches and white theology is pushed as well. Can I get the next slide, please, ladies and gents? All right, now. So as we're marching through this, as we're seeing, Dr. Du Bois calls it a problem. We see how the cultural hegemony works, what Dr. Hale talks about, how all of the systems, even a thing like standardized education, favors a particular group because of the way you take it, how you take it, all those sorts of things. Thank you, Young Praise. Appreciate you, Black man. All of those things, right? So the cultural hegemony happens. As Dr. Wright was saying, our ways of knowing, our conceptions are all being pushed to the side, and we are being forced to move into their environments. All that unpleasant stuff happens. And then Dr. Du Bois says, Negro children will be instructed in public schools and taught under unpleasant, if not discouraging circumstances. Even more largely than today, they will fall out of school, cease to enter high school, and fewer will go to college. Now, this is where it gets interesting. On the screen are two scholars. The classroom as killing fields. Killing fields is a term that the great elder and ancestor Malcolm X referred to education system as the killing field. Right? He's told by a white teacher that instead of imagining the greatest possibilities for himself, you know, his people, white folks would never hire him and Black folks never trust him. Right? And so that in many ways influences his path toward criminality. Right. Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu has spent the vast majority of his academic career examining the reality of the struggle of Black males and Black boys in school. So many of his texts, The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, and the one that I think that I have spent the most time with, which is To Be Popular or Smart, talks about the crisis of Black boys. But interestingly enough, Dr. Priscilla Ocean, who's a law professor at Loyola Marymount, studies how these environments negatively affect Black girls. Now, interestingly enough, in Memphis and Shelby County, Black boys accounted for 67% of the expulsions in Shelby County. But interestingly enough, when you start looking at the statistics nationally, and we start really thinking about all of that, the U.S. Department of Education argues that Black girls are suspended 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. So as Du Bois is talking about these unpleasant environments and they're going to be kicked out of school, the average white teacher can't speak to the realities of Black kids. The curriculum is rigged towards not teaching the realities of things, right? If I had time, I could talk about this in every academic discipline that's possible, particularly in the field of spirituality. That's a whole different conversation. I wish I had time. But when you examine the work, Priscilla Ocean recently was a part of a study that talked about the over-policing of Black girls. How Black girls, every part of a Black girl's life in school is policed. Hairstyles, aesthetic presentations, dress, all these sorts of things. Yeah, absolutely. And so Jawanza Kunjufu says that black kids make a choice around the 3rd or 4th grade that they're going to be popular or smart. Professor Ocean talks about how are we going to think through the reality that Black girls, a story that doesn't really get told as much, we don't really think about them as much because there are so many other narratives around Black women, are really being punished in these school systems as well, right? And this has long-standing effects long after the kid gets out of K through 12 education, right? And this affects all of these things when we look at the loss of Black teachers, the loss of Black greatness, all these different things. Absolutely. Black girls seen as too grown. Many folk escalate situations. Absolutely. The teachers do not understand their cultural perspective. So situations escalate. We just saw recently in the last couple of years, a 9-year-old little girl handcuffed and dragged through the hallway. These kind of things are crazy, right? But what happens, right, when we look at these crushing environments, this problem that Du Bois talks about? Black value systems, elder love, cultural knowledge, cultural norms and procedures, knowledge of the struggles of Black life, how we formulate our identities, all of those things, right? The dropout rates, the school and community violence, how we see this thing called Black on Black crime, as if everybody else don't commit crime against people who live near them, right? All of these things are byproducts of what we're dealing with in these schools. And so one of the things that Jawanza Kunjufu talked about, he said this. He said, exactly, the mad Black woman idea. This is what he said because he's an educational consultant. He gets called in when there's problematic populations. He says this. Normally, school districts bring me in to fix the bad Black students. The assumption from the superintendent or the principal is that there's really nothing wrong with the school, especially in a school district where in the good old days, when the neighborhood was all white, those same teachers were successful with middle-class white students. So it has something to do, and there is something wrong with the students. So typically, I would say this to all parents. Just because the teacher says something is wrong with your Black child, and just because your Black child seems to be rebelling or not succeeding well in school, that might be cause for concern. You need to investigate further. It does not matter if your child is in the pre-K or getting a PhD. Remember, they are in an anti-Black, anti-African cultural milieu. Even if the teacher happens to be Black. Black skin does not equal a Black environment. Be clear. They are reacting to an aggressive alien culture. Remember that. There are nuances, whether it's a Black male child, Black queer child, a heteronormative Black girl child. There are nuances and things that we could discuss. If I had time, I could unpack some of that. But just for the sake, please remember that. All right? You're right, Mama Casey. Many times there's alienation that Black kids feel, such to the degree that they don't talk at all. Go to the back of the class. Look, you got to really analyze what these report cards are saying. If it says your child don't participate, why? If it's just say your child doesn't want to do the work, why? What is the impact of growing up in a place academically where everything is anti-you, or nothing you're getting is affirming of you? The reason why many of us don't even know any of the names of the scholars who are being discussed tonight is a reflection of how anti-Black the curriculum is. Right? Can I get the next slide, ladies and gentlemen? Now, thank you, Reverend Harper. Yeah, all skin folks and kin folks. Now, here's what's interesting. On the screen is Reverend Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays and venerated elder and ancestor Mary McLeod Bethune. Now, it's interesting because Du Bois begins to talk about, after he said the kids will be discouraged, after he says it's going to be an alien environment, after he says they're going to fall out of school, he says that they will cease to enter high school, fewer and fewer will go to college. He then says, theoretically, Negro universities will disappear. Right? On the screen, Mary McLeod Bethune is highlighted, not because these are the only ones we have, but she founded the institute. She founded a school that was called the Daytona Normal and Industrial Institute for Negro Girls. As you can see, these beautiful young Black princes that she got with her. Later, what we know this now to be is Bethune-Cookman University. Benjamin Elijah Mays was the president of Morehouse College and was, he said himself, in the eulogy he gave for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he eulogized Dr. King. He was the intellectual father of Martin Luther King Jr. When we don't have Black institutions, Black churches, Black schools, Black organizations, Black book clubs, Black anything that teach from a Black perspective, one of the calling cards of Abyssinian, we preach different, we teach different. Where is this kind of study available in the average Black church? When we don't have these institutions that can ground us, teach us what we need, when we lose those institutions and we do not have those institutional backing, our people are rootless. Institutional rootlessness, right, as Albert Clegg talks about, means that we cannot sustain struggle. You lose movement and memory. Everybody starting from the beginning. Everybody thinks that what they're doing is special. James Baldwin has a quote that I used to have hanging up somewhere. He said this: I used to think all my pain was my own, and then I read, how do we pass on the legacy of struggle? Why is everybody starting from the beginning? Everyone feels so overwhelmed by struggle because we don't have institutions that ground us and train us to do that. And that's one of the things that as Black folks who are interested in Black liberation, we need to do a better job of. There's nothing inherently wrong with us. What is the purpose of European education? It is to promote white supremacy. Our institutions have to promote Black liberation and liberative Black thinking and sustain that. Sustaining that means giving us the cultural food we need in order to move forward, no matter what in what area of life and people activity we're engaged in. Right, and that's what Du Bois is talking about. He says when these Black Negro universities will disappear. And what will that mean? Right,
Chris.
Yes, sir. Bob.
How can we achieve Black liberation when we have been forced to accept the narrative of white supremacy, that our institutions, our educational system, our ways of teaching, our struggle in itself is inferior?
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that we have bought into so much of the white supremacist narrative that you have people like that Langston guy saying some of the stuff that he's saying.
Right.
Well, why don't basically what to me, it's like he's saying, well, just go ahead and succumb to what.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
Succumb to what the white boy want to do, because
hold on one second, Bob. Hold on one second, Bob.
Better.
Lady Denise, could we get the next slide real quick? Perfect. Go ahead, Bob. Keep going.
Yeah. Tragedy. The tragedy of miseducation. Yes. Oh. Now, I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit.
Go for it.
We were talking about Brown versus Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about the Jim Crow education. I remember my grandmother telling me about when she was growing up in a little county not far from Memphis, a little county called Fayette County, Tennessee, right up this Highway 64, where I was actually born. But anyway, they had grades 1 through 8 all in the same classroom.
Wait, let's say that one more time. Grades what?
Grades 1 through 8 all in the same classroom. The teachers taught everybody from the first grade to the 8th grade. And usually, a lot of times in some of the schools, it was an 8th grader that did the teaching. I guess it was the smartest 8th grader or whatever that was teaching the 1st and 2nd and 3rd graders. So the open school concept. Thank you, Sister Bennett. Yeah. The struggle was definitely real, and the lack of resources was even more real. The lack of teachers was definitely real. So yeah, when you had someone that went off to Tennessee State and got a degree in chemistry or English or whatever, did they always come back to where they came from? Did they come back to Fayette County? No, a lot of them went on other places. And what's really bugging me about all of this is that it seems like the folk at the table want to put us back into that tragic situation.
Oh, for sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm at the table, but you don't want to feed me.
Right. I
like
have to not to make say just because you have
to eat what
I'm sitting at the table. Just because we all sit at the table don't mean we all eat. We're not all diners. If I got a plate and nothing on it,
right? Maybe I don't want broccoli. I don't know.
Oh, I think you're absolutely correct. And so what's interesting is that brings us to the next thing that we got. Now, I did not know that W.E.B. Du Bois were petty. I did not know he was petty. I knew he did a lot. I did not know he was petty. Okay. And I was really intrigued because on page 195, where we are situated tonight, he tells us another haunting thing. Negro history will be taught less and less, if not at all. And as in so many cases in the past, Negroes will remember their white or Indian ancestors and quite forget about their Negro forebears. Okay. Taught less and less or not at all. We now live in a moment, like Nazi Germany, where books are being banned. There are wars over the curriculum. Anything black is under attack. Dr. Fisher outlines scarily for me in his book that, Sister Bennett, I believed that he was an elitist for a lot of his career, and I think he was in many ways like many of us. He was in a period of transition all throughout his life. By the end of his life, he apologizes to Marcus Garvey. W.B. Petty Du Bois. Yeah, he was petty. And in many ways, he apologized to Marcus. He apologized to the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He writes a book with Booker T. Washington, right? And is walking back a whole lot of the things by the end of his life. What we're reading is in the last 3 years of his life. So he's walking back a lot of the things he was thinking, even about the talented 10th that was in his early writings, right? He was in transition like a lot of people. Dr. Fisher say, I don't know no black scholars who not petty. But this was extra petty. Now, one of the things that I think happens as a byproduct of all the anti-wokeness, all the white supremacist thinking, all of the white supremacist scholarship that we're forced, all the white ideas that we're given as fact, all of the whiteness that we swallow. One of the things that happens is that we start to relish the whiteness that we participate in. That plays out in a lot of ways. I'm gonna tell y'all this story real quick, just because I think we need to understand how dangerous the internalization of white supremacy is. And then I'm going to get to the pettiness that Du Bois exhibits. I have a good mentor of mine who is a practicing attorney up in New Jersey. Practices in New Jersey and New York. He said he was in law school and he went to observe a trial. Okay? In this trial, a black man killed another black man. This is him telling the story. And he says to me, he said, Chris, they got everything you can imagine, all the evidence in the world against him. They got the gun, they got motive, they got fingerprint, they got everything. So open and shut, the prosecutor got every kind of evidence you can imagine. The brother is convicted of the murder of the other brother. The judge sentences him to ever. And Bernie Mac say, how long? He asked Bernie Mac, the comedian, asked the prisoner once. He said when he performed at a prison, he said, "How long you got?" He said, "Ever." He said, "No, it's a long time. We take the 4 off that mug." Right. So he get ever in prison. And after he's sentenced, the judge asked him, "Did he want to say anything to the court?" He said, "Yeah, I want to say something to the court." He raised his stand up. What would you like to say? He said, "Your Honor, I understand I killed somebody and all that. But why I don't understand why I'm getting so much time. After all, I only killed a nigga." He had been socialized that black life and black ideas and black folks and black people and the creation of black folks was so irrelevant that there's obviously should be no penalty for killing one of us because after all, we don't mean anything. He had internalized the anti-blackness and white supremacy so far that he was confused as to why he was getting a long sentence for killing someone who looked like himself. That level of internalized self-hate needs to be analyzed. So when Dr. Fisher got something like the Voices Project, we need to take it serious. Why do we arbitrarily do these things to each other? Because the sacredness of ourselves and our identity has been completely lost. Now, this is where the pettiness comes in. So Du Bois says, Negro history will be taught less and less, or not at all, as in so many cases. In the past, Negroes remember their white or Indian ancestors and quite forget their Negro forebears. And then he says, this is the petty part. Read, for instance, the autobiography of John Mercer Langston. Now, I didn't know who Langston was. So I go do some research. And John Mercer Langston wrote an autobiography called From the Virginia Plantation to the National Capital. He is the first senator, one of the first black seated officials from Virginia. Right? And what happens is, in this book, I want to just read for y'all a little bit of what he said. And this is why Du Bois is like, this is what happens when you don't know your history. He says this. Now tell me if this sounds familiar. In the dedication to the book that's on the screen, you can't really see it based on just the way the technology was set up. He says, to the young, aspiring American. And he black. He's a formerly enslaved person. But boss, we sit. To the young, aspiring American who by manly and self-reliant effort will gain standing and influence, serving his day and generation by such personal accomplishment and useful heroic achievement as show him worthy of his citizenship, God and destiny shall prove themselves the sure supports of such person, bearing him to victory in every contest. He has only therefore to be true, brave, faithful to win the highest rewards of dignified life, as bestowed in honors and emoluments of his fellow citizens. If you just pull yourself up from your bootstrap, if you just be a good guy, America will give you everything you want.
And keep the other Negroes in control.
And keep the other Negroes down. The same way that brother who kills the other brother and is confused, Mercer Langston is So excited. All throughout the text, it's painful to read, y'all. I read a good amount of it. It's painful to read. He's excited about his ancestry, that he got up, that he's not just black. I'm not black, I'm OJ. Okay. He's excited about that. He's excited about his Indian ancestry. He's excited that he's in everything else but black. He also brags in the book about how he demeaned himself. He used that term. His language, not mine. How he demeaned himself in the presence of white folks so that he could get more and more. And Du Bois is like, please don't be like him.
Tim Scott.
Right on time. Can I get the next slide, please, Lady Fisher? Mm-hmm. Yep, we got some modern day Langstons, y'all. On the screen is Tim Scott from South Carolina, Republican Senator. And Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. These two people, Tim Scott has said America is not a racist country. Clarence Thomas from the bench has done everything he can to undermine black liberation. But what I want you all to know is that this is the goal of white education. It is to make this sort of behavior, this sort of anti-black behavior, this internalization of black inferiority, and to support that, that is a byproduct of how you are socialized. Minister Louis Farrakhan has this thing. He said, when you see a black person acting out of order, you should be able to go to their collar and look on their collar, and you should see "Made in America." All of us got a little bit of Langston in us at different times. Just because we're underperforming, not performing well, struggling in a particular area, have done some things that are regressive, remember, you have been socialized this way. We have white theology in blackface. We have white anthropology in the study of our society, sociology in blackface. We have black people who are in black spaces who are doing things that are byproducts of white supremacy. The proximity to black folks does not necessarily mean you have black ideas. Right? And so we have to be careful. He says, if you want to know what that's like, read, for instance, the autobiography of John Mercer Langston. You can be a person formerly enslaved. You can go to segregated schools. You can be mistreated. You cannot learn anything about black folks from the time you come to school to the time you graduate with a PhD. And you can still wake up one day and say, if you just work hard, you can get anything that you want. What does it mean to be educated? When I introduce people to Abyssinian, the scariest thing about Abyssinian for people is how overtly black we are. I had folks who came to me, it was like, he say black Messiah from the pulpit for real? People are uncomfortable. James Cone said, blackness saved me from whiteness. We are under attack. All forces and attacks of white supremacy are not just getting called the N-word. It's not being taught about yourself. Everybody, imagine this. Type it in the chat if there's any scholar you heard about on this that you have not heard of before. And why? These are giants in their field. Right? Can I get the last slide, ladies and gentlemen? So the second grounded question is, how do we reframe education so that it works in the interest of black liberation? Okay. Yeah, James Cone said that. Blackness saved me from whiteness. We have to reclaim, restore, and keep our righteous black minds. And that's me paraphrasing from the movie The Great Debaters, where Denzel Washington is playing the esteemed debate coach, Melvin Tolson. So that was the job of the educator on Wiley College campus. The black educator's job is to help you find and keep your righteous mind. Right? On the screen are Doctors John Henrik Clark and Dr. Yosef Ben Yochanan. Now, Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, who he was affectionately called Dr. Ben by many, are historians by training and also were very interested in black theology. Yosef Ben Yochanan wrote a book called Black Seminarians Without a Black Theology. You can go to school as a black person, study theology, study spirituality, learn everything about the Bible there is to know, and still not have a black theology. So what we have to do from a methodology standpoint, how do we reframe and reshape this is, I think, a few things. One, we have to first accept that what we have been taught in the mainstream typically does not serve our interests. We have to accept that. It's in somebody's interest that you think that Jesus is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white man from Europe. Although he's gone to be, as Yosef Ben Yochanan talks about, he's hidden in the land of the blacks. Kemet was the original name of Egypt. Egypt is a Greek word. They call their land Kemet, land of the blacks. Don't throw the Bible out, right? We got to do that. Absolutely. That's on us, not them, right? And first, we have to accept collectively that that's what happened. That this was not, we were not taught things in our interests. That we were in the killing fields, as Brother Malcolm said. The next thing we have to do is developed through collective work and struggle, things like we're doing right now, develop and love a value of ourselves in our community and history. We have to start to learn that the things that we give us, that came from us, are valuable. And that's a protracted struggle that we need our institutions like the Black church to do. And then we have to realize that all of the things, when I talked about the suspension rates and expulsion rates in Memphis and Shelby County, when we think about Black boys deciding that they're going to be cool or smart and doing all the things that feeds the likelihood of us going to prison. Do you know in this country, they build prisons based on third grade reading scores, third and fourth grade reading scores? America's so belligerent. When I was a child, there was a show on television called Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? They knew that because the average reading level in America is the fourth grade. This is why people jump up and down and vote for a fool who tell you he gonna build a wall when there's a television show on TV bragging about tunnels. This is why people cannot tell the truth from a lie, because we are wholesale, as Carter G. Woodson would say, miseducated. And we have to come as a collective and know that what we give each other is just as important and special as what we've been given. And know that it is literally a matter of life and death. If we don't do that, we die. As Dr. Fisher told, we in danger. The reason our children don't do well in school, the reason we're so vulnerable to so many things is because we do not ground ourselves in righteous study and learning of ourselves and our consequences and who and what the enemy is. Let me get a little preachy just for a moment, if I could. We don't fight flesh and blood. Sometimes we do. But spiritual wickedness in high and low places. Ratchet white curriculum, spiritual wickedness. White Jesus, spiritual wickedness. That's spiritual wickedness. A black man sitting in court convicted of killing another black man, saying I only killed the nigga because he's been taught to devalue himself at that level. that black life is irrelevant, spiritual wickedness. And it comes from high places, the departments of education, the Supreme Court, the White House. We have to be able to do this. This is why spaces like this, spaces like collective study, this is why places like Abyssinian is important. Right? Anybody got any questions, comments?
I have a comment.
Yes, sir.
And I agree with everything you're saying. I agree with it.
Absolutely.
The thing is that there is no but to it. There's something that we must do.
Absolutely. That's why it's called Whither, Now, and Why.
We have to keep on doing it. We have to keep on doing it. I've had people ask me, said, do y'all ever talk about Jesus at Abyssinian? I said, yeah, we talk about Jesus all the time.
Absolutely.
We don't talk about a European concept of Jesus. We don't talk about a imperial
Roman Jesus.
Yeah, Roman Jesus. We don't talk about that. We talk about the God of all truth. We talk about the Jesus of all truth. We don't talk about this fictional Jesus that white Christian nationalists have formulated. We don't talk about that. Continue to do the things that are necessary to uplift our people, to uplift our community. Those are the things that we are about. We stand up for black folk, and we stand up for black education. We stand up for righteous black education. That's standing up for black people. That's showing up for black people. I know we almost at the end of our time, but Chris, like I was telling you the other day, man, you are really on to something here, and I really appreciate it. I really, really do.
I appreciate you more. I think,
yep.
I when you called me baby boy the other day, I want you to know that meant a whole lot to me, and I'm thankful for it. Yes, the relationship of these things, and we have to just really realize how important, and that I think one of the things that I wish I would have said earlier is that the problem that we have in getting people to read is that we don't really think about how consequential it is. For the lack of knowledge, white folks will destroy you, or whatever the Bible says. Sorry. For the lack of knowledge, white supremacy will destroy you. Yes, absolutely. We appreciate everybody. And I want everybody to know I'm thankful for the platform to be able to do this. I'm thankful for my church family, but we can only do this if you all support. So at the bottom are ways to give. Give here because you can, give here because you should, and give here because we teach and preach different. At the bottom is all different ways to give, all different digital ways to give. At the bottom, streaming across your screen right now, is the Cash App, the Givelify, Cash App, $ ABC Ministries 1, ABC Ministries 1 at gmail.com on PayPal, Abyssinian Missionary Baptist Church on Givelify, and through old school stale mail, P.O. Box 9715, Memphis, Tennessee 38190. I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Thank you in advance for the gifts. Thank you in advance for the relationship. I hope this has been meaningful and helpful to folks. And see you next week when we will stay in Whither, Now, and Why. And we will be going forward in Dr. Du Bois's speech that he gave in 1960. So I appreciate everybody. And we will be continuing into August. Thank God that we have been given the go ahead to continue to go through August. So I really appreciate this. I know it's a lot of material here, but please let's walk through it and be righteous about it, because it's liberatory when we study. For the lack of knowledge, our people are destroyed. So let's continue to go forward. Ashe and amen. Thank you, everybody.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Baba.
All right.
All right.